This is the second presentation on the nervous system. We'll look at how the electrical message is sent, and then we'll also focus on reflexes. So just as we studied when we studied the muscle, how the sarcolemma of the muscle depolarizes, this happens exactly the same process electrically to send that impulse along a nerve. So we know that it is polarized, or in the state of polarization. We know that we have the sodium ions predominantly on the outside and potassiums on the inside. And we know this takes energy to do this, and that's why we call them the sodium and potassium pumps. And it makes it more positive on the outside. So we want it to be this way if it is in the state of being ready to accept a message. And when a message is being sent, that is depolarization, or the nerve is being depolarized. And just as we studied in the muscle, this is when sodium enters the cell, enters the nerve cell, and that message keeps going on. The nerve impulse, or the message, is propagated. That means it keeps going, because here again, a part is depolarized and then it keeps kind of passing it down. So it goes along the membrane of the axon to keep it going, so that the message goes on to another nerve or a muscle or a gland. Just as when we talked about muscles cannot stay depolarized because they would just wear themselves out, so would a nerve. So the message must stop, and that is repolarization, or the nerve cell being repolarized. And we recall that that occurs, potassium goes to the outside, so now they are switched. And as soon as they switch, it switches back to polarized state, so it's ready to go again. We use the term statutory conduction because we mentioned that the myelin sheath helps in the speed, because only the nodes of Ranvier must depolarize, so it can send the message more quickly than if it had to go on every tiny bit of the nerve area. So remember, polarized state, sodium on the outside, potassium on the inside. Depolarization, message being sent, sodium inside, so they're both inside. Message stopped, repolarization. Potassium goes to the outside, but this state doesn't stay that way. It just then quickly reverses it back to polarized. Sodium on the outside, potassium on the inside, so it's ready to go again. So this is a main focus of this presentation. We'll also now begin looking at a few parts of the central nervous system and talk about reflexes. So the spinal cord, that's encased in the vertebrae, here again for protection, and it transmits impulses from the nerves, peripheral nerves, to the brain for processing, and then it sends out the response. And if there's a injury to the spinal cord, the message then can't come in and go up to the brain beyond that. We also mentioned before about the meninges. That was the covering, and we will talk about those a little bit later, about their layers. So the spinal cord extends from the foramen magnum in the occipital bone, the base of the brain, and then it goes down to between the first and second lumbar vertebrae. We talk about gray matter. Those are the cell bodies of the motor neurons and interneurons, and they make an H shape if we would do a cross-section and look at the spinal cord. And then the white matter are the myelated axons and dendrites of the interneurons. The ascending tract carries information from out here and sends it up to the brain. The descending tract sends down the response. And between the layers of the meninges, we have this cerebrospinal fluid. And we mentioned before that it is there to nourish and to cleanse. I will talk about these briefly, but I'm not going to test you on this either. The main nerves that come out of the spinal cord are called spinal nerves. And between the vertebrae C1 to C8, the nerves supply head, neck, shoulder, arms, and diaphragm. Between the thoracics, T1 and T12, T1 is for the arms, and the lower ones are for the trunk. And the lumbar, 1 through 5, sacral, 1 through 5, and the coccygeal, the nerves come out there for the hips, the pelvic cavity, and the legs. So each spinal nerve has two roots. Obviously, information needs to come in. So that's the dorsal, that's the back one. That brings the information in. And then the front ones, the ventral roots, are where the axons of the motor neurons, where the response comes out of. We will focus on spinal cord reflexes. They are an involuntary stimulus to a response, and they are processed, obviously, in the spinal cord if they are spinal cord reflexes. Now, the brain sometime can, here again, inhibit or enhance, but if it's totally done without any thought overcoming it, it will just be processed in the spinal cord and the same response will occur. And this was your book. This is the patellar reflex. You can see the little percussion hammer there where the arrow is, and if one isn't really paying attention and that little hammer knocks against the knee, we should have the knee straighten out a bit. It will kick forward, if you want to call it that, because it is bent. It will be, extending a little. And here again, that is picked up by the sensory nerves and sent to the spinal cord. It is processed there, and the reaction of that little kick comes right out. Now, if I'm watching it, I can overcome that. I can say, no, I'm not moving my leg no matter what you do. But if you're not paying attention, this would be the natural response. So we call this the reflex arc, the pathway that the nerve impulses travel when a reflex is elicited. So meaning the receptors, as we said, pick up the sensation and generate the impulse towards the central nervous system, in this case being the spinal cord. And we've got a receptor that picks up the change. The sensory neurons send it to the central nervous system. Here again, with these reflexes, it's just in the spinal cord, so they are processed in the interneurons, and then the result, or the reaction, if you want to call it that way, is the motor neuron effector goes out to make the action occur. So like I said, it's a little arc from picking up to processing to a response. There are two types of reflexes that are spinal cord reflexes, and I want you to know them. The stretch reflex are here again an automatic way that keeps muscles in proper alignment, ready to go. So this keeps the body upright and in its shape. Happening all the time. We don't even think about it. And then our flexor reflexes, if you touch something that is painful or harmful, like you touch something hot or something sharp, you'll automatically pull away from it. And here again, that's considered the arc of the sensory neuron that's the receptors picked up the sensation, message sent to the sensory neurons to the interneurons of the spinal cord for processing, and then your motor nerve sends the message to, hey, pull that away, which you will. So we will now continue to look at parts of the central nervous system. We did the spinal cord. Now we're looking to structures in the brain. There are ventricles, or sort of open areas, that have cerebrospinal fluid. There are two laterals, sort of in the bottom of the brain. There's a left and right, and then a third and fourth behind them, and sort of going down towards the back. And each of these ventricles has a choroid plexus. And this choroid plexus is a group of capillaries. And here again, when we talked about water compartments, the liquid part in the blood shifts into these areas to become cerebrospinal fluid. So cerebrospinal fluid is made in the choroid plexus of each ventricle. Then we're looking, sort of coming up from the spinal cord. We call this the brainstem, looking at the back. So we'll name each structure, certainly look over the pictures in your text, and we will be doing an activity that will point these out throughout this study of the nervous system. So the medulla, vital functions here, heart rate, breathing, and the vasomotor centers that lets our vessels expand and contract. Very, very important part, vital. Also, the reflex for coughing, sneezing, swallowing, and vomiting happens in this area. That's where it's processed. The pons has the respiratory centers. It also interacts as a connection between the medulla and other parts of the brain. Moving on up, we've got the midbrain. This is where the cerebral aqueduct is located. That's the tunnel connecting the third and fourth ventricles. But the big thing I want you to remember here is this is where visual and auditory reflexes are processed. And so are righting reflexes, the thing that keeps our head upright and keeps our balance. The cerebellum is sort of behind this brainstem at the base of the brain. I call it a cabbage-looking thing. But this is where the functions that are below the level of consciousness occur. So we will remember that coordination, muscle tone, trajectory and endpoint of movements, posture, and balance are here again monitored, and the responses to take care of to keep them occur here. There also does deal with some sensory functions as well. Moving on up, the hypothalamus. We're going to talk a lot about this when we do endocrine system, because this is where ADH, antidiuretic hormone, and oxytocin are produced. The hypothalamus also produces releasing hormones which affect the anterior pituitary gland. The big thing that we're going to think about, though, is this is where body temp is regulated. It also regulates food intake to keep the blood nutrient level high. It monitors the hormones of the fat cells and obviously the enzymes of the digestive tract. Because if I have food in there, I need to make sure that they're having enough enzymes so that my food can be digested. It integrates the autonomic nervous system, which we will talk about in the final presentation. It stimulates visceral responses during emotional situations, and it regulates body rhythms. So hormone oversees some hormone production, it regulates body temp, and body rhythms would be the highlights. Not that they're all important, but those are the ones that we're sticking with. The thalamus then above that is a group of sensory impulses that go into the cerebrum. It integrates information from cutaneous receptors and from the cerebellum. It feels unpleasant sensations, so we know that it doesn't feel good, but it doesn't tell us what part of us, if something rubbing up against us doesn't feel good. It suppresses unimportant sensations. It is involved in alertness and awareness, and it contributes to memory. So our focus here will be the involved in alertness and awareness, because this is where we get our focus from. Now we will look at the cerebrum. Obviously, that's the majority of the brain. It is divided into two parts or hemispheres, left and right, and each of these has a frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital lobe. The corpus callosum is the longitudinal fissure the whole way through that separates the left from the right hemispheres. And it is a band of neurons that connect, and here again, the corpus callosum integrates information from the two sides. The cerebral cortex is the outer surface, the gray matter. It is convoluted. It has many folds so that there can be more neurons in this same space. Basal ganglia is the gray matter within the white for muscle tone and coordination, and then these convolutions are broken into little sections with bumps up and down, and those are called sulci or fissures. So we will briefly look at each of the lobes and what they do. The frontal lobe has the motor areas. This is where we generate impulses for voluntary movements. The premotor areas are here again when we need to learn a skill with a variety of steps. It monitors that. The prefrontal or orbitofrontal is an area that decides about appropriate emotional responses, that we can follow the laws of behavior, and that we can anticipate and plan future events. They feel that some people that commit some crimes maybe have some kind of deficiency in this area. But besides knowing that the frontal lobe generates the impulses for voluntary movements, it also houses the Broca's area of speech. And that's important because people that have a problem in this area, they won't say the words. They can make a group of sounds. They may know the word they want to say, but the impulses don't come out to move the mouth, the tongue in the proper way to be able to make the sounds that they want to. So the parietals are on the sides. The frontal was obviously the top and the front. The parietal is like at the top, if you want to call it, left and right. These are general sensory areas. So we're going to focus on here these are cutaneous sensations. They receive impulses from the stretch receptors. So we would need to remember that because that was important for muscles, and these are the areas of taste. The temporals on the sides are where we process, smell, and hearing, olfactory and auditory. Also, another important part here is the areas of speech. Thought preceding it. So here again, people that have a problem in this area, they can say words and they can pronounce them well, but they may not make any sense because they were not able to process and come up with a good response to what someone else said. The hippocampus of this area is involved in memories as well. And then the occipital is the area in the back. These are visual and spatial processing, and these certainly are athletes. Look to this. And then throughout this whole brain, we have association areas, and we call those the areas of reasoning, logic, learning, and memory, all the things that make you you. And we have a quick view of them here. Since this is running long, I'm not going to discuss them, but you can go back and look at this picture versus the important parts, that important functions that each of these parts do.